Hi, my name is Corey, and I'm a CG specialist here at Chaos Group. I'm very excited to share with you today our new renderer, V-Ray 5 for Maya. We'll go over many of the powerful new features that will speed up your workflow, while giving you even more control and flexibility over your images in post-production. We'll begin by exploring the newly supported ACES-CG color space, along with a few UI updates, including the newly redesigned V-Ray frame buffer, where you can manage your renders and do extensive post-processing. Next, we'll cover the completely new V-Ray proxy, with its in-depth hierarchy and override functionalities that make it faster, more flexible, and handier than ever before. We'll then cover some updates to materials in V-Ray 5, including material presets, as well as the new coat and sheen layer parameters. We'll also take a look at a few new randomization options, including the handy new stochastic tiling mode, as well as utilize the upgraded V-Ray Dirt to create procedurally generated streaks. Then, we'll check out the new improved sky in V-Ray 5, which gives you even more dynamic sunrise and sunsets. Finally, we'll explore some of the powerful new post-production tools available in V-Ray 5 for Maya, including the new light path expressions, which make it possible to extract specific lighting events from the scene for very fine-tuned control of the image and compositing. In addition, you can go beyond rendering and do light mixing, as well as do extensive compositing, all with the new V-Ray frame buffer in V-Ray 5. Okay, I've opened up a Maya scene here that I'll be working in throughout this webinar. Let's get started by taking a quick look at the V-Ray settings. I'll be using the V-Ray render engine for this scene, but note that the features we cover today also work on V-Ray GPU as well, so you can use whichever render engine best suits your preference. Regardless of which you choose, V-Ray 5 is designed to give you great-looking renders right out of the box, using just the default settings for most scenes. Now, I'd like to start with taking a quick look at the new color space options that you can take advantage of with V-Ray 5, and cover a few UI changes we made to the Render Settings UI. In the V-Ray tab here, let's drop down the color mapping settings. Here, we'll find a menu for changing the rendering color space. You'll see here that V-Ray 5 now comes with a native implementation of the ACES-CG color space, which is the Academy color encoding system, developed by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. ACES-CG works with a lot more color information than sRGB, and has become the industry standard of the ACES encoding system for computer graphics. In V-Ray 5, there are two ways to render in ACES-CG, either switching the rendering color space here, or using the recommended approach, which is to leave this color space on the default from Maya preferences, and specify ACES-CG as the rendering color space in Maya's color management preferences. Then you can use the color management rules to automatically apply the input color space for your textures. Each of these methods has further considerations regarding the color space for certain textures, such as bump mapping, normal mapping, and displacement. You can also still override the color space of specific file nodes for textures not covered by the Maya color management rules. Since you'll need to decide which workflow best suits your specific scene, we recommend that you take a look at our docs page for additional information about rendering with ACES-CG. For example, the OpenColorIO variable is still an option in V-Ray 5, and you can follow the steps in our docs for more information. Okay, let's also take a quick look at the DMC sampler settings above. If you're familiar with past versions of V-Ray, you'll see here that we've simplified the DMC settings so that all the sampling of shading effects is fully automatic. To control the shading quality of your image, you only need to use the image sampler settings. In addition, we've added the new blue noise sampling method in V-Ray 5, which is a checkbox here that is enabled by default. Blue noise sampling automatically produces a more pleasant result for renders that have low sample counts, or in situations where you're using depth of field or motion blur. It is generally most noticeable when rendering lower quality images with fewer samples. Alright, let's close the render settings and click on this icon here to open the newly redesigned V-Ray 5 frame buffer and explore the powerful new functionality it offers to enhance your workflow. To start, you'll see that we have some icons along the top right here. These are our main render controls, which include the render and interactive rendering buttons, as well as debug shading options for viewing the render in different shading modes, the ability to save our image, and so forth. On the left here, we have the Render Elements dropdown. If I click on File, Load Image, I can import an image I've saved in advance. Now we can use this dropdown here to switch between the different render elements that were rendered with this image. We also have a button here to toggle between the RGB and alpha channels. Next, if I double-click on this handle on the left, I'll open up the History panel. Here we can store a history of rendered images with their post-production corrections, and do A/B comparisons between images. There's also a search bar you can use to filter the image history based on scene paths or notes you've added to the images. Right-clicking on any image lets you add a note, as well as access other options, such as loading in the post-processing layers from a saved image, a topic we'll cover more about in a bit. Down below, we have a toolbar that gives us pixel value and coordinate information based on where our mouse is hovering over the image, which can be displayed in different formats. Now, let's double-click the handle on the right here to open up the new Layers panel. In V-Ray 5, you can now manage all of your post effects in this layer tree-based editor. This panel contains powerful tools and an intuitive workflow for doing color corrections. You can see that the image I loaded in already has some color corrections here in the layer tree. These include corrections such as the lens effects, denoiser, filmic tone mapping, and so forth. If I select a layer, for example, let's select the lens effects, we can go to the Properties section to make tweaks to its settings, such as adjusting their intensity, which you'll see updates our image right away. I can also hide or unhide layers by clicking on the eye icon next to each layer. If I click on the source layer, the properties will show us the option to switch between three modes: the RGB image, the light mixer, and the compositing mode for further adjusting your image. We'll cover these modes in more detail later on. Up at the top of the layer editor, you'll see we have a set of icons that let us create and delete layers, save and load in layer tree presets, get quick access to saved presets, and undo or redo changes. If I click on the Create Layer button, you'll see we have a variety of layer options to choose from, which we'll explore in depth later. You'll find similar options in a context menu if you right-click on any layer as well. Lastly, there is a Stats tab here, which gives us useful information about the scene, such as performance and memory tracking data, depending on the scene and the rendering mode. Okay, let's collapse the Layers panel. Note that if you need to make any adjustments to your VFB setup, such as specifying your VFB history folder path, you can do so in the VFB settings located under the Options menu at the top. Now that you've been introduced to the overall layout of the new V-Ray 5 VFB, let's take a look at an exciting new feature, the new V-Ray proxy, which gives you increased performance and functionality to speed up your workflow. In V-Ray 5, we have completely overhauled the V-Ray proxy with entirely new functionality that makes it more powerful than ever. The V-Ray proxy loads geometry from file on disk at render time only, allowing you to render scenes with many millions of faces, more than Maya itself can handle, since the geometry is not present in the scene and does not use up resources. The V-Ray proxy node loads Alembic or ABC file formats, as well as our native V-Ray proxy file in the VR mesh file format. Any mesh can be exported to these formats from Maya and then loaded in as a proxy. And if you're working with an older scene containing the old V-Ray proxy, it can be easily converted to the new V-Ray proxy using the built-in Convert to New V-Ray Proxy node tool, which you'll see is located here in the V-Ray Tools menu. When using either the VR Mesh or Alembic file formats, everything that is needed to render the mesh is included in the file, including a simplified version of the mesh for preview purposes in the viewport. To demonstrate, let's switch cameras here and then try loading in a V-Ray proxy using the VR Mesh format, though you can also use the Alembic format since the new functionality works for both. I'm going to click on the Import V-Ray Proxy button up here in the V-Ray UI, although you can also just drag and drop a VR mesh file into the scene. You'll see that we're prompted with an import menu here. Let's load in a building geometry as a proxy, which I've prepared in advance for this scene. Also, let's make sure the Use the New V-Ray Proxy node checkbox is enabled so that we use the new functionality. Note that you can also set the geometry preview mode for the proxy before import. This means that if you want to load in the proxy right away and have 0 reads of the file, you can set the geometry mode to none. If you set the mode to full geometry, you'll have additional preview functionality in the viewport regarding materials and hierarchy highlights. In this case, let's import this single building proxy in the full geometry mode and press the Create button to load it in. Now, you'll notice right away that the geometry loads in pieces to give us a preview in the background. Maya's functionality remains fully responsive, and we can keep working while the proxy finishes loading. Note that the proxy also loads in faster and gives you better viewport performance compared to the old proxy, especially for animations, and it even renders slightly faster as well. Once the geometry is finished loading, you'll see that we have a unique looking wireframe outline, which indicates to us that it is a proxy. Now, in the attribute editor on the right, we have a bunch of proxy settings, including the new Object Hierarchy dropdown. This lets you view the full hierarchy of the proxy file contents to give you much greater control over the proxy, and works for both Alembic and VRMesh files. Depending on how you've set up your geometry before exporting it as a proxy, you'll be able to quickly navigate your proxy's object hierarchy with ease. For example, if I select something, you'll see that it highlights in the viewport to indicate what parts of the proxy geometry are selected. And note that at the bottom of the object hierarchy, the proxy's materials are listed as well. If I click on the little eyeball icon, I can turn off visibility here for an object group, so that I can hide specific pieces of the proxy's geometry. We can also use the Override Visibility button below to accomplish the same thing. These are both examples of a hierarchy override. With the new V-Ray proxy, you can use either hierarchy overrides or advanced overrides to override materials and geometry visibility. For example, we can override materials with new ones if we select a material and then choose the Override Shader button. If we click on the texture swatch icon here, we can replace the proxy's material with a new V-Ray material and then tweak it a bit. For example, I'll change its color to a reddish pink and tweak a few other parameters here just to make it stand out a bit. Note that you can even override materials by dragging and dropping materials directly onto the hierarchy. Okay, let's return to the object hierarchy and head down below to the advanced overrides. These overrides are executed before the hierarchy overrides and enable us to set rules consisting of the name or path of an object from the file's hierarchy to override the visibility or shader for the rule. Simply clicking Add New Item lets us type in an object name or the path of an object from the file's hierarchy to identify. For example, I'm going to type wall into the visibility override and also put asterisks on either side of it. These asterisks act as wildcards, which when placed on either side of the name of an object, such as wall, will match all objects that have the word wall in their name. Now I can toggle the visibility of the wall objects using this checkbox here. Note that you can also use an asterisk at the end of a hierarchy path to then match all objects contained inside a group. If you're unsure of an object's name or path, you can even select an object or group in the hierarchy, select its path, and middle mouse drag it into the advanced overrides to copy the path into a rule. This same rule-based functionality applies for the shader overrides below as well. If we add a new item, we can identify geometry with this rule, then connect a scene material and assign the shader to the objects matched by that rule. Both advanced overrides and hierarchy overrides can be used at the same time together. These advanced rules are intended for general, large-scale override assignments to capture multiple objects at once. Meanwhile, hierarchy overrides give you straightforward controls for more granularity. To see more information about how to format rules and other override capabilities, you can take a look at the V-Ray for Maya docs page for the V-Ray proxy. Alright, now that we've explored the new V-Ray proxy, let's delete these rules and material override, and move on to take a look at the new material presets available in V-Ray 5 for Maya. Looking back at the render we loaded in earlier to the new VFB, you'll see that we've got a bunch of materials here on the motorcycle. If we were just beginning to shade our scene, we might find it helpful to have some presets to start with that we could then fine-tune further. In V-Ray 5, we've made it possible to quickly and easily set up common materials, such as metals, glass, plastic, fabric, water, and so forth. Instead of spending precious time looking up IOR values, you can speed up your workflow with just a few clicks and get realistic-looking materials to use in your scene right out of the box. Let's head back to our scene and switch cameras so that we are focused on the motorcycle's fuel tank. Then, let's explore how we can use different material presets to get started shading. To use the presets, let's first create a V-Ray material and apply it to the motorcycle's fuel tank. Then, we can click on the Presets button up here at the top right to replace our current material with a preset material from the menu. The presets are separated into categories, so you can easily find metals, fabrics, and other dielectric materials. Let's try using something a bit unorthodox, but which might look interesting on a motorcycle, like this ceramic material. To use the preset, I'll choose Replace, and let's take a look at the result in the IPR. Okay, that looks pretty interesting. I like how we're getting these striking reflections from the jacket as well. Let's try out a few other presets now, just to demonstrate. This time, I'll try replacing the material with the plastic preset. Alright, that looks pretty nice. Now let's try something more unusual, like maybe this metallic aluminum brushed preset. Now that's giving us some interesting reflections. As you can see, there's an extensive variety of presets for you to choose from and experiment with. More importantly, they can give you a quick starting point that you can then further customize and refine, saving you time so that you don't have to build materials completely from scratch. In addition, you can test out presets for ideas and experimentation, and you may even discover some distinctive results that you normally would not think to try. And that's not all. We've also added some new parameters to the V-Ray material, such as the coat layer dropdown, which makes it incredibly easy to give your materials a sleek and glossy finish. To demonstrate, I'm going to assign a carbon fiber material that I set up in advance, and then let's tweak the coat parameters to see how we can improve it. You'll see here that this carbon material looks pretty nice, but it's missing that shiny finish that we would normally expect to see on a bike. To create this effect, we can head to the coat layer dropdown, where you'll see that we have some straightforward and powerful parameters that we can use to enhance our materials and textures. The coat amount is of particular interest, since it controls the blending weight of the coat layer. 0 means no coat layer, while higher values blend the coat gradually. In this case, let's simply increase the coat amount to 1 and see how that looks. You'll see right away how the material really starts to shine and embody a polished, glassy character, giving us some nice and sharp reflections too. The material could easily be further refined using the other coat parameters as well. For example, introducing some color to the coat, or tweaking the IOR value to distort the reflections. But in this case, I think the coat looks great with just the default settings. Alright, let's go ahead and stop the IPR. You can see now how the coat parameters make it easy to experiment with glossy and reflective coat layers, without any need to set up complex blend materials. It also renders faster than a blend material, so you can stay focused on the creative process and get results quickly. Okay, let's switch cameras here to take a look at a piece of cloth in our scene, and see how we can create a realistic looking fabric material using the V-Ray material's new sheen layer parameters. These parameters enable us to create a cloth-like appearance. You can see here that we've got a crate box with a piece of cloth strewn across it, as well as the V-Ray material already set up that has a cloth texture plugged in. Let's go ahead and select the cloth, and then in the Attribute Editor, scroll down to the Sheen Layer Parameter dropdown. The sheen parameters act as a top reflective layer on the diffuse color, allowing us to create a fall-off effect for cloth with straightforward controls. This way, we can create materials such as satin or velvet. Alright, let's start the APR again so we can see what the cloth material looks like without any of the sheen parameters enabled. You can see that we have a nice looking texture for the fabric, but it's missing that fall-off effect that makes it appear like a textile material. To fix this, let's first adjust the sheen color to something we'll see pretty visibly, like a light yellowish orange color. Next, let's increase the sheen amount. The higher the amount, the more of the sheen color you get. Finally, I'm going to lower the sheen glossiness, which controls the sharpness of the reflections. Higher values let more light reach the diffuse, therefore diminishing the sheen's visibility, whereas lower values reflect more light, making the sheen effect more pronounced. Okay, great. Now you can see that the fabric is looking much more like cloth thanks to the sheen layer, which is giving it a nice additional warm glow across the folds in the top left, and adding a natural-looking fall-off effect. Altogether, the new sheen parameters make it incredibly easy to give our material the soft reflective character of fabric without any need for complex shaders, so that we can work faster while getting realistic-looking results. Now that we've explored